So my name is Benson Muite. I'm a software developer based in Nairobi at the moment. And I've been interested in Flutter. I've been learning it and want to learn more. So I'm hoping to use this as a motivation to do a little bit more of a mini project and hopefully collaborate with some of you. So I'm learning a little bit about Deluo. So Amosi is, I think, supposed to be hello. Is that correct? And happy Software Freedom Day. Today is actually also a celebration of open source software. And I guess I'm an open source enthusiast. So I'll actually try and register this event on the site once we're done with the talk. Hopefully that's okay with the organizers. And you can get some idea of other places in the world where there are events happening celebrating open source software. So yes, later today, I'll hopefully add a mark with Kisumu on there. Only other place in Africa at the moment is in Cameroon. Okay. There's also one event in the, I guess, North America in Toronto. So maybe I'll move on to what we're doing. So as we're recording, I guess I'll also give a brief introduction to Flutter because there may be people who attend or listen to it afterwards that don't know much about it. And then give a brief understanding of accessibility. And then examine 2 websites for accessibility. Then we can discuss the W3CAG guidelines, and then look at a demo Flutter login form. Hopefully be able to demonstrate the screen readers, but there are other types of screen readers available. Discuss a little bit about text-to-speech synthesis, and then summarize. So I hope this will be interactive. So feel free to ask questions as we go along, and hopefully also participate. Okay, so what is Flutter? At least my understanding is it's an app framework that allows you to create desktop, mobile, and web applications from one code base. And so this is really helpful because it means as a developer, you can save time if you are working on projects where you need applications to work on several different platforms. Things I would typically also consider is Qt, which is a C++ framework that works for desktop and mobile. SDL, which is mostly used for games and is written in C, but this will also work for desktop and mobile. Qt is C++. And then Cordova, which allows you basically to create a web page that will show up in an app and also works on desktop and mobile. These are all open source projects, slightly different licenses. So one would need to check those as well. At least one drawback for me with all of these is that they don't really support mini programs. And if you're interested in writing things for Chinese market, this is another thing to consider. And many programs at the moment being standardized. And these are like little web pages that are much easier to download and fairly lightweight. So it makes it easy to create an application and maintain it. Okay. Accessibility. So this will mean different things. But the main idea here is that you will have, so hold on a second, need to reshare. Okay, there you go. You want to be sure that anybody who needs to use your application can do so. And many countries typically have laws, including Kenya, that indicate that applications should be accessible. And typical considerations will be screen readers. So if somebody cannot see, then they will use an application to take the text and read it out loud to them. Contrast and colors. So if somebody's colorblind, they should still be able to distinguish what's on your site. And so you should also make sure that similar thing happens with an app. People should be able to distinguish buttons and things. So if, for example, somebody is, say, blue-green colorblind, and you choose a blue background with green text, similar contrast, then there'll be people who will not be able to read your site or read your application. Font sizes. So if you make your font size too small, this can be problematic. If somebody's site is not so good, but they can still see, then they may also need to enlarge it. And so your application should support that. Language. So if your target audience doesn't use English, then you may need to ensure that there's translation. Or if they prefer not to use English, even if they can use it. This is also another form of accessibility. And then alternate representations. So as an example, if you have a picture, you typically want to have some kind of text description, because if somebody's using a screen reader, then this picture on its own is not going to be meaningful for them. Similarly, if you have a video and it has sound, you might want to make sure that there's captions, because if somebody can't hear, the sound will not be give them useful information, right? But you have to check. These are only typical suggestions, and it may vary quite a bit with your audience. And many of these considerations also make things useful for regular users. So many, for example, captions can be helpful if you're in a place where there's a lot of noise in the background, and you then can't really turn up your sound, or sound, even if you do turn it up, it won't be helpful. So these are maybe some primary considerations, but you probably also need to think and not just go with what's been legislated. Okay, so let's look at some websites. One thing I've looked at or used extensively is the webbing tool. And we can look at the Kisumu County website. And there's also a Visit Kisumu website that's hosted on government domain. So this tool I found quite helpful. You can run it online, and it'll go through and analyze a page. I'll also try and upload these pages. So just going to the Kisumu County website, and this will come through. So the tool itself kind of goes through and tries to analyze things. For the first one, it says, recommend using something a little bit different, but we'll actually wait for it to finish. And And I think for the second one, it's kind of coming through. You're getting some idea what's there. So the websites themselves are actually hosted on WordPress. For the main website, this is probably okay since there's some interactivity. But the second one actually does not have very much interactivity, and in particular could be done using Flutter instead. So sorry, my connection's a little slow, so it takes some time to come through. So any questions so far on kind of what I've presented?
Oh,
Yeah,
really, sorry, really great insights. But I wanted to ask, for example, if you are examining the website of the Kisumu County website, are there tools that you are using or we can use to examine a website so that we can tell if they are accessible or not?
So the WebAIM one is one I like. I've used quite a lot. There are a few others that will work, for example, with continuous integration. So you can actually, one of the things that's recommended here, this Wave browser extension, the code for that will actually allow you to run a CI service, or very similar codes for that will allow you to run a CI service. And so you can actually add accessibility test or automated accessibility testing when you're building your applications. And this is something I'm looking to do as well. At the moment, primarily for Ruby, but there's other frameworks. And I think Flutter also has extensions that will allow you to do that in testing. So I guess you can, it comes here, it goes through, it gives you a warning that it may not have done everything correctly. And it suggests using a few other tools. In particular, this extension is something that, if I open the link to that, you can install in a browser, and I think Chrome also has that. But you can actually see it tells you kind of things that are missing, right? So a form label is missing, there's an empty button, and there's kind of 3 empty links. And then contrast errors are also there. And then it has a number of alerts. Okay, so I'll go to the other one since it doesn't have this thing, but these are things that you can typically fix. I mean, these are perhaps not too bad. So in this case, it doesn't give a warning, so you can actually see the whole page, but it tells you that there's 13 errors. And you can actually see that it highlights a lot of the things. So there's kind of a picture of the site. In this case, there's a boat in the background on Lake Victoria. And then on top of that, there's kind of icons which represent each of the different things. So for example, there's an H1 icon indicating there's a header in the HTML file. And the things that are red are kind of the things that it's telling you that there's kind of warnings, right? So it's giving you some idea about, you scroll through the page, the food, there's like a YouTube link. And then it tells you there that the link itself, that there's a bit of an error there, that there's something it doesn't like. There, I think it's telling you about the contrast. This is probably okay. They wanted to do the background. So with most automated tools, you actually also need to check and be sure that it's doing what you expect it to do. There's a link here telling you that, again, there's an error when you have a register now button. And another link for another error on these links. Okay, so if we actually go through and click on view the details, it tells you things that are missing. So first one here is tells you that it's missing alternative text. And if you click on it, it goes to kind of the header image on this website. And you can click on the next one. Again, this is missing alternative text. And here you have an image showing kind of Africity's logo. So it's a conference logo. And if you have a screen reader, then a screen reader will not be able to inform somebody who can't see what the image is of. Okay, again, image of wildlife safari. So one of the featured cruises. And I guess another image, which is a link text. So you also get things like low contrast errors. So this is kind of a background that is the same color. Again, a background is the same color, so this one's probably okay. Image here in the background. So these parts seem maybe not so serious. In the sense that there's no information being associated with those.
Just a quick note about that. The where it says featured cover story, that's a straight up case of text on background, and you can be pretty sure that that is a real actual issue. That's balanced with the fact that you're looking at a yellow-orange color, and there are known challenges with getting oranges to work well with the existing color contrast measurement algorithm that's employed by the legal rules. Now, where this is dicey is when stuff's on top of photographs. That might be a false positive. You could be right that those are not really issues so much, but where you've got a flat background and you've got color colored text right on top of it, that's almost always a real issue. So that featured cover story, that's an issue. The stuff on the photographs, actually, there are tricks about darkening the background around the text, where that's where you can improve the contrast, but it's a pain to do it. The one thing I will say about Wave is when it calls out a color contrast issue, it's generally right.
Okay. So maybe go back to one of them. So I think when the highlight. Okay. Yeah, so I guess it's saying, low contrast between text and background colors. And then it's usually possible to click on the code. And this is kind of what's produced. For something like WordPress, usually the link to this and what's written in WordPress is okay, is easy to understand. For Flutter, you may need to do a little bit more work, and similarly for static site generators. But it gives you some idea, I guess, as you're developing what things you want to change. Yeah, so again, low contrast between text and background colors. Thank you. So the other one is like an orphan form label. I believe that's this one. Okay, so that one is 2 links to the same URL. Again, your screen reader will have repeat things, needn't repeat, and very small text. So somebody who has not so great eyesight will be unable to read in conjunction with the county government of Kisumu. So that could also be enlarged. And then the YouTube video, click on that. So it says, yeah, that this links to embedded YouTube video. And I guess there's no alt text there. So screen reader might not pick that up and tell you to, I guess it'll probably know that it needs to play, but it may not know what's there. And then it actually goes through and links some of the nice things. So as an example, here you have that the language is indicated, and it tells you that the language of the document or page element is identified. So you can imagine that if you have a screen reader, being able to pick up the correct language will mean that the pronunciation that's produced is going to be correct. Okay. So I hope that's kind of giving you some idea of typical things that you can get from some of these tools. And I'll move on to the next slide. So now on slide number 8. So there's some guidelines, right? So the tool kind of is created from guidelines, and there's actually a working group for that. And so I'll show the web page for that working group. So they're working on 2.2 version of the guidelines. And you can get some idea of the people who are involved. So it gives you that there's a draft version, latest editor's draft, which is on GitHub, and latest recommendation. And you can actually go and make issues yourself. And then it gives you a brief description of what the web content accessibility guidelines are, and the fact that what we're looking at now is a document, and they actually ask you for comments by 4th October. I'd recommend maybe taking a look at these as well, especially since it will give you some idea of the types of things that you want to have. And so, for example, we can look at the audio and video. If it's pre-recorded audio, it asks that you can present an alternative. If it's video only, they might also ask you to have alternatives for that. So typical things you might want: captions, except when there's already text for that. Again, for audio, you might also want text, so media alternative text. Audio description, so these are things that you want for the video. If there's going to be sign language, and yeah, if it's already live, then I guess what you might require for live audio, live video might be a little bit different than for pre-recorded, because you can post-process the pre-recorded stuff. So these are things that and they're in the guidelines, and then you would want these somehow indicated in metadata. And this is kind of the thing that web accessibility tools will check for you. Okay. And typically these things are specified such that you can do this for one web page. But if you have to do a whole site, then typically you want to go or have your tool examine every page on the site or crawl every page on the site and examine it and give you a report. So just going back, I guess they give you an email address here where you can actually send comments, and there's a comment archive. So, okay, so it's not so heavily used. Last message was on, was in April of this year, 2022. And there's a recommendation from a communication sciences and disorders student. And you can actually view the message. Okay, so just summarizing it, so they say that they're looking at aphasia, which is a language disorder, and they want to see if they can make recommendations on having formatting that's friendly for people who need this accommodation, right? So we can maybe go back and check some of the other messages. So let's maybe check March. So March, there were 18 messages because I think this is when they were about to do a release. And so you see topics like CAPTCHAs. So many people have problems with CAPTCHAs, especially if you're using a screen reader, because they usually require you to see something or move things. There's some issues here with Zoom, so we can maybe look at that message. And so I guess they're saying here that if you're both deaf and blind, then if you have getting Zoom in a Zoom conference, even if you do get text transcribed, so that you might have, for example, a Braille reader, then it's not actually possible for many people to read this material that's streamed onto a Braille reader. So this is something that they may need to consider further for having web accessibility. Right. And also identifying speakers is an issue and needs to maybe be addressed. Right. So, I mean, these are things that have been brought up because people are now doing a lot more video conferencing. But also, I mean, if you guys have things that you can consider, especially since I guess a lot of this feedback can be given online, and that's also worth doing. I think representation from Kenya and Africa in these kinds of forums is relatively low. Okay. So maybe move on. So there's a kind of lab that's been created to teach you how to use Flutter. And I spent some time trying to do this. So there's a documentation for how to create your first Flutter app. So you kind of went through and installed this on my computer and then ran it. And okay. So the app, I guess many of you probably will have seen this if you've tried that. Just going through this kind of a short animation showing you a sign up screen, and you can kind of put in your name, first name, last name, and then username. It'll give you a sign up thing. So looking at this, so maybe suggest a couple things, at least for an international audience. You might find that people have more than one name, more than two names. So you might want to maybe have a first names, or allow for the possibility that there'll be more than two names. Either have a single name column or a last name column and other names column, and then the username. So the app kind of gives you some code that you can go through and try out and check that you can build it. And I've gone through and done that and generated the HTML. So now look at that using the Wave accessibility tool. And it goes through, so it takes a bit of time to load, I think, because it's using JavaScript in the background. But it's now coming through. And it actually tells you that there's one error. And so if I click on view details, kind of the error is that there's no language identified for the main code. And if, for example, we come back to the visit Kisumu app, you see that at the top it's got this NUS at the top of it. And so this is helpful if you're using screen reader, because then it'll know what language to use. Okay, so that's kind of the thing I want to fix. And I have not quite figured out how to do that yet. So I will probably have to do that afterwards. I think that should not be too bad. But one of the issues, I guess, might be what will happen to the other applications. So the mobile app and the desktop app. But otherwise, the form seemed okay. Okay, so screen readers. At the moment, we kind of just use a tool and just tries to give you some idea of what's going to happen. But you typically do also maybe want to have either find somebody who has an accommodation that they want and ask them to try out your application, or try out your application with some of the assistive tools that other people will use. And one tool that is available is Orca. So there's a screen reader that's available for Linux. And it's open source, free. If you don't use Linux, you might be on, say, Mac OS or Windows. Another tool is NVDA. This is also open source. And so it's something you can install on your own machine and try out to get some idea how things will work. So Orca here is kind of showing you the user page. At the moment, my desktop is KDE. And so this is typically installed within desktop environment. And so gives you some idea how to, I mean, at least this is more for developers, but gives you some idea how to build it and use it. I can maybe try and show how one might configure this. NVDA is kind of also available here, so I'm kind of showing you the website. So they have a video. So this is something that you might also want to try if you're creating a web application. Okay, and one of the other things that you can actually also get with NVDA are extensions. So you can actually choose the voice you want to hear. And this can be useful, for example, you want to have, say, audiobooks. So a lot of time, people would rather listen to a book when they're driving or going somewhere than read it themselves. So this is technology that you can actually also put in your applications, not just to make it accessible, but to improve the user experience. So I'll stop the share for a moment and actually maybe share my full screen. Okay. So you can probably now see my full screen. So here, for example, there's the accessibility setting. And there's a screen reader already built in, so I can click on that. And as you can see there, it uses Orca, and I can change the configuration. So I'm just clicking on that to show how that works. Did the audio come through?
Yeah, it did.
Can you hear me?
Yes,
so
we
you heard
can.
the screen reader.
Yeah,
Did
sure.
you hear the screen reader?
Just barely.
Okay, let me try and remove my mic. And, so the quality of the sound might decrease a little bit, but
default combo box default.
okay.
Screen reader preferences dialog, general page tab, profiles panel, active profile : combo box default.
Okay, so it's giving you some idea. Typically, if you're not sighted, you will not use a mouse, so you'll navigate using, say, the tab key.
Tab, load push button. Save as push button. Apply push button.
Okay. So this also requires some getting used to, and if you need to do lots of clicks, this may make your application tricky to use. So I'll hit cancel
push button.
and then click OK. So this gives you maybe some idea of how this would work. And you can actually also use this with, say, web page. We're almost out of time, so I won't go into much detail on that. So one of the things that's often used is text-to-speech. And there are a couple examples where people have done this for Kiswahili. So I've put some links in the slides to some work that was done out of the University of Nairobi, right now about 10 and 15 years ago. And the idea here is to actually just write a file which describes the language. So you have all the syllables in the language, and you basically have pronunciation for each syllable. And so when you have the text, it can actually make a representation of that. So I'll stop share and go to actually share my console. So what you're seeing here is maybe some of the output from and so one of the speech-to-text tools that's often used is called eSpeak-NG. So if I do eSpeak, so I don't know if you heard, I mean, it spoke there. I'll maybe try and change my settings again so that the screen reader it is.
We could hear that it was speaking.
You heard hello?
No, not that bit previously.
Okay. Let me try again.
Project/Flutter Kizoo/Flutter accessibility /public speak Kizoo. Benson speak Kizoo. Return. Benson at Fedora /project/Flutter Kizoo/.
Yes, we could hear it was saying a lot of stuff, but there was the brief Kisumu in a different voice.
Yeah. So I maybe go back to system setting.
Benson at Fedora code.
So eSpeak is one thing that can be used to power a screen reader, and I mean, it sounded a bit mechanical, but it's one of the more straightforward ways to add text in languages that don't have them. So eSpeak does have Kiswahili as well, but it's one of the. It's actually possible to add other languages such as Duolingo. Okay, so there's a number of references here in the Flutter documentation. There's a kind of an app which does a hometown guide, and I'd like to use that maybe as a template to create the Visit Kisumu kind of website using Flutter. So I'll probably do that over the next week or so. The kind of code for this presentation is accessible. So Erokamano Ahinya, which means thank you very much for your attention. And I'll put a link to the presentation in the chat. So if you have a GitLab account or willing to create one, I'll be very happy to collaborate on making a Visit Kisumu app. And I guess I'll post in the meetup group once I've made a pull request to add the header to the first demonstration. So thank you for your attention. Sorry, I've run a little bit over. I'm happy to answer any questions.
First, let me say thank you, Benson. You answered immediately one of the key questions I've had about Flutter web accessibility, which is whether or not they'd address the page language issue, and it sounds like they haven't.
So that might, I mean, that might be me because it's they may not update the app.
If you built the app according to their instructions and it doesn't set any page language, that's an issue. And they should have accounted for it in the tutorial. The way it used to be is it hard-coded every Flutter website to English. And at least they're not doing that now. But the question, the open question is whether they let you set the language of the page. And as you rightly pointed out, this is very important in terms of getting the correct pronunciation from any screen reader.
So from what I've read from the people who've done things, they have added annotations to each of their application. You can add annotations. For example, if you have a dictionary, you might have a multi-language page. And so you would want to annotate each section according to the language. But I don't know, I still need to figure out how to add that. I mean, as a default setting for the page generation. Because you don't want to do that for every paragraph if your page is in one language. Yeah. But yeah, thank you for your comment. And I guess I can add, I'll add raise an issue on GitHub and I'll post a link in the meetup group. So if people want to contribute to that, then that would be great.
Thank you, Benson. Yeah. And I also saw on the chat, Robert added a course if you are interested in accessibility. So it's a course, he's saying that it's an easy course for the WCAG guidelines with lots of great background. So maybe if Robert, you could comment about the course briefly for those who are interested in accessibility and everything. Maybe you can take the chance to do so before we take up any other questions.
Sure. Just a quick note, the W3C guidelines, the WCAG guidelines are not the best place to start with accessibility because they are international standards. They're technical standards, and technical standards documents are meant to be exceedingly precise, and they're very hard to read. Honestly, those documents scared the heck out of me when I first tried to get into this field. What I really recommend, the W3C collaborated with the edX online courseware development site and developed a course on their introduction to web accessibility. I threw the link for that into the chat, and it is an awesome course. You can do it free, or you can pay some nominal amount and get a certificate that you took it. I highly recommend that course. It's how I got over my fear of the WCAG guidelines. And there's a great deal of background information as well as information about how to successfully test websites that's in that course. It's not a short course, but it's a really good course. There's also a link to one of the introduction pages from the W3C's Web Accessibility Initiative in the chat. That's another great place. They've got a few online course materials of their own that they didn't put on edX. A lot of good videos showing you how people with real disabilities use the web. It's a great, the W3C has done a pretty good job. And to go back to that edX course, that is the most accessible online course I've ever seen. And that they used accessibility techniques to teach accessibility, that was just funny. So on the whole, there are some great places to start. Flutter per se as a mobile app development environment always struck me as handling accessibility pretty well out of the box and giving you some good techniques to deal with it. Not perfect, but when they first brought out Flutter Web, it had major issues with web accessibility, and that's very much something I hope to learn more about. But I haven't done much of anything with Flutter Web. In fact, nothing with Flutter Web. I was keeping myself to mobile back when I was playing with Flutter. But it's definitely a topic of interest. If anybody has any questions, though, I'll yield the floor.
Awesome. Thank you, Robert. Do we have any person who has any other questions in regards to Benson's talk?
So is anybody interested in helping build a Visit Kisumu app? I don't have an iOS phone and my Android phone is rather dated, so I'm not able to run most Flutter apps. So if somebody's willing to help testing with that, I'd really appreciate that.
Yeah, sure, I could be able to do that.
Thank you, Sante.
Oh yeah, thank you. So I've seen also Kevin saying he's willing to. So so aside from that, maybe we can post this in our groups so that we would get other people who would be interested who are not here with us. But thank you so much, Robert, for your Benson, for your presentation. It was really amazing. And I have one question. So apart from scanning and trying to see accessible websites and what they can improve on, So what approach would you recommend? Would you recommend people doing scanning? At what stage would you recommend people to scan their website? Is it at the point of starting to build the website, or when they're completely done? Because yeah, when they're done, I believe they'll face many issues, but I'd love to hear this from you. What's the recommended state of scanning for accessibility issues, and what should you keep in mind?
So I guess I'd say it depends on the size of your project. For a single page site, you can get away with running the scanner afterwards. If you're maintaining kind of a large site, then you probably want to have some plugin that occasionally checks things. So for static site generators, which I've looked at, there's a few with Ruby. You can get plugins that'll actually check accessibility while it's building the site for you, and give you warnings or recommendations, which you can then fix. If you are building, or if you have a very large, say, company site, then you do actually want to run not just during initial development. So, I mean, you probably want to have accessibility built into your web development plan, and have testing as you go along. And at some point, you actually do want to reach out to your target group and have the or have some members of the target group give you feedback, or make it easy for them to give you feedback when it goes live, and then fix things. So I found, for example, a scheduling application where somebody was using a screen reader, and the section of the field to change the month did not have alternative text. And so they complained about it. Granted, the application is not, I mean, it's not run as a commercial service. So the person who's developing it does not make any money out of it, and is basically been doing it because he wanted to try and develop something out of an algorithm that he had developed for privacy preserving scheduling. But I have seen, I mean, there's people who also complain about payment devices. So if you don't have site and you have a payment device and the device does not have physical buttons, then you need some way of giving feedback. And if there's no speech engine, such as you have on mobile phones, this can be very problematic, because then you can't really use, say, a credit card with this point of sale device that does not have typical buttons to enter your PIN code. So you typically need to start thinking, I mean, at least for commercial applications where you have, I mean, you're not just building it for a specific group of people you know, but for the general public. You probably want to start, as you said, at the beginning when you're designing, and have tests built in all the way through. Yeah.
All right, thank you so much for that. If we have no other questions, then of course, maybe you can close it up for us.
Yeah, so thank you very much, Benson, for that good presentation. And I think unless there's another question, I think we'll end it there. And every resource shared on this, I mean, on this meetup, we'll share it with you in the you know, maybe a week or so. So the video, I mean, it's been recorded, and also the resources, the slide, the Benson slide, and the resources yeah, shared, plus the resources Robert shared on the chat. So we'll share with you. So with that, I think everybody, thank you for joining us, and see you next month.
Thank you, Okok. And just to add on that, I think Robert has said that we must start the accessibility work during the design phase, because otherwise too easy to incorporate bad patterns. And I agree with this, because at the end of the project, you'll have so many technical debts that you need to fix for the things that you would have fixed at the design phase. So that's pretty much okay. Thank you so much, Robert, for that. And to Benson, I highly appreciate your presence today for speaking to us about accessibility, a topic that so many people don't have like keen look, especially for their websites and even in our apps. So thank you so much for this. And I believe people will start having accessibility issues like in their mind when they're developing their websites. So thank you so much for that. And we'll share all the resources with all our offline members and people who are not able to join us here today. So thank you. Otherwise, have a great evening.